And lawmakers are still waiting to see the bill for the Tropicana site. A legislative proposal for the ballpark has to be drafted and filed. $395 million, that's the ask for financing. The ballpark would be in what's called a tax district. The deadline for a bill to pass both chambers is May 26, 11 days away. Many of you keep asking Fox 5, how much will a ballpark cost you, the taxpayer? Fox 5 is getting answers on what some lawmakers say and your concerns.
It's not coming out of the general fund. MENA is basically paying for itself.
Proponents say a ballpark will not cost you and will not cost taxpayers anything. That's the pitch from the Oakland A's to lawmakers and lawmakers to the public, how a ballpark can come to Las Vegas.
There would be no room tax, for example, that goes into this. There's no money that would have been generated that would go to education. Governor Lombardo, he doesn't want to raise taxes. This does not raise taxes.
Even if a ballpark bill costs taxpayers zero, there is debate about the impact of a tax district and tax breaks on taxpayers. The A's are asking for $395 million in financing, including short-term and long-term bonding, property tax exemption, and revenue from sales, payroll, and retail tax to be redirected into bonds. Proponents and lawmakers say this is how major projects like stadiums get paid for. And tax breaks help companies move here, help folks get jobs, and generate revenue for the local economy. Valley says the ballpark could bring in 2.5 million visitors a year. A study also says visitors could book 400,000 rooms a year.
By not collecting money they would have otherwise collected, that is a cost to the taxpayer.
Some of you are asking about the cost of tax breaks. Just ask professor and economist J.C. Bradbury from Kennesaw State University, who authored The Economics of a Stadium Subsidies.
So there actually is a cost to the community because if those tax dollars are being spent elsewhere in the community, those taxes are no longer being connected. Do you want to not pave roads as much, not hire as many police, or maybe you could have given a tax cut back to the community?
Bradbury argues from locals to tourists, when people spend money in a stadium, that money would have generated taxes elsewhere to fund something our government pays for. I asked, could a stadium be worth it in a town that thrives on tourism?
You have to consider, are there other venues available? So if there are multiple stadiums in town, building a new one doesn't help you bring in new events.
And Fox 5 has asked several county commissioners about your concerns. Commissioners Naft and Seegerbloom say they like the idea of a ballpark, but want to make sure it's not a burden to Clark County taxpayers. They also are waiting to see that bill.